Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
So welcome to this latest episode or series, let's say, of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really pleased to say we've got Lima Huertas from Microsoft on the podcast today. So I don't think Microsoft needs much introduction to you all, but I think it'd be great to hear first of all from Lina. We're going to be talking about digital manufacturing, lots of topics around that. Actually, it's very broad. We were saying just before, it's a very broad topic, so we don't quite know which areas we'll dive into more, but hopefully you'll enjoy this series. So I'll just hand over to Lina first of all, just to sort of introduce herself. Lina.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me, Neil. And she said, my name is Lima Huertas, and my role at Microsoft is a manufacturing industry advisor, which is an interesting role because, I suppose often with a lot of people, we're not necessarily known for being an industrial partner. We're more known for all of our modern work solutions around, obviously, Excel. Everyone loves Excel. Everyone loves PowerPoint and Teams, but less so when we go and talk about the areas that I look after, which is around engineering, product development, factory, supply chain, connected product. They kind of sometimes wonder, why would we be talking to Microsoft about this? Surely we'll be talking just to Siemens. But yeah, I think ultimately our focus is around cloud technologies, cloud services, and data and AI. But obviously that has a huge role to play across the manufacturing life cycle. And we provide a lot of capability together with our partners. So, it's a joint story with partners like you guys. We don't operate in this space on our own. And it's more an area around being really close, I suppose, or ethos in this space is being really close to customers and really getting close to the outcomes that need to be achieved, and then just orchestrating the ecosystem to provide a solution. And it's usually always different partners, different solutions. But what we always bring to that is our cloud services, the platform, and the data services behind that, including AI, which is a big topic today. So yeah, that is my role. I've been at Microsoft for around a year and a half, and my background has always been in digital manufacturing for my whole career. I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and simulation engineer was my first sort of career. And from that, I've been leading teams around different types of digital technology and introducing digital technology into manufacturing.
Oh, excellent. And okay, would it be okay to touch on your previous role as well? Because that's where you'd heard of, say, Senseye in its previous now Siemens, but your role with MTC as well, because I think that'd be quite interesting for the listeners too.
Indeed, yeah, that's probably where I've spent the biggest chunk of my career at the Manufacturing Technology Centre in Coventry. So I started there as a simulation engineer, looking primarily at factory simulation. But then I got broader and I started leading what was at the time the informatics team, looking at everything around data, connectivity, kind of IoT analytics. And the first time I came across Senseye is because we got involved in the whole topic, obviously, of predictive maintenance, all the way from kind of, what data needs to be measured, how do we capture the data, what do we do with the data, and looking at topics a bit more innovative like self-healing. And since then, there's been quite a few projects in that strand of predictive maintenance where Senseye has been really, really involved. And I dare to say there is quite a close collaboration between Senseye and Siemens in some of those projects. So maybe there was a little part to play in the whole acquisition and becoming part of the big ecosystem.
Yeah, no, exactly. Didn't know that either. So that's very interesting. How these, well, obviously I know about Siemens and Senseye and the overlapping as partners and customers and all sorts. So it's interesting. And actually, on that point about ecosystems, because you mentioned it in sort of your, in your introduction as well. So, what importance do you place on partners in sort of successful digital transformation? Let's say as a broader subject.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, if I forget Microsoft, just in general in digital manufacturing, I think none of this can happen on its own because it's all about bringing piece of a puzzle together. So I think for any manufacturing, working very closely with partners, manufacturers won't they have a huge amount of capability. I mean, they're super innovative. They have a huge amount of skills, but this is so broad. And really the trick is in connecting the things together. So I think it's always really important to work with partners and to choose the right partners. I think that's sometimes one of the hardest parts of kind of starting in this journey, kind of getting a sense of the market and understanding who could be the right partners to work with from a, I suppose, skills perspectives and capability when we talk about system integrators, but also from applications, because there's just so much out there. But also from a Microsoft perspective, as I mentioned at the beginning, particularly, I mean, in all areas, but particularly when it comes to industry, partners are a fundamental part of how we deliver, because we are ultimately a platform. You know, we don't own an MES system or a predictive maintenance kind of application or anything like that. We provide the backbone to enable all of that and to connect it together. So for us, working with the partners that are going to provide the right applications and that have already done the groundwork around different types of topics like predictive maintenance to enclose that knowledge into an application that can deliver quickly for customers is really important. And that brings me to a point that is really key for us as well in partnerships and working closely with partners, and is that topic of time to value, because often, or in the past, digital manufacturing projects have been really complex. They have taken a lot of integration, a lot of partners, kind of complex interactions, and from a manufacturer's perspective, it's really hard to kind of cope with a project that's only going to deliver value to me in that kind of 2 years. You know, it's a hard pill to swallow, let's say. But by organizations like eGuys and like us working together, we can almost pre-knit some of these solutions so that we can reduce time to value for customers. And I think that's really key in unlocking the whole transformation for the sector.
Yeah, I guess on that note as well, so in terms of selection of partners, because I mean, I don't know, I mean, maybe it's a bit unfair to ask you how many partners does Microsoft have, but I mean, there must be a massive selection and who are already onboarded as partners, but then there'll be others who want to be or emerging as new partners. But I don't know how would, well, Microsoft, how, in your opinion, how would you prioritize which partners to sort of focus on and work with over others potentially?
It's really hard. We don't kind of provide recommendations as such. We're really guided, I suppose, by two things. One is what the customer wants to achieve and what their existing relationships are, and what new partners might work with their existing incumbent ecosystems. So really definitely guided by customers to start with. And then the other thing, even though we don't really have preferences between one partner or another, inevitably we have closer partnerships in terms of the amount of time that both organizations, the partner and us, have invested in building that relationship. And inevitably, where we have invested more time, there's more innovation, there are closer integrations, and therefore time to market is closer. So sometimes that makes things easier. But we're kind of obviously completely, what's the word? Just escaped me.
Agnostic.
That is the word. Thank you. We're completely agnostic, and we're all the time. I mean, we have I think it's probably the largest partner ecosystem anywhere. We have hundreds of thousands of partners, and we're all the time. We have a huge team, like partnership team, onboarding new partners all the time. And obviously the technology landscape evolves, and you never know when there's going to be a completely new partner bringing in disruptive technology, and we really need to keep an eye on that. So there's the topic around being very customer driven, obviously working on partnerships that are rich and deep, that brings benefits to the customers, but always trying to bring in new partners who are relevant as well.
Yeah, it reminds me of stuff I've heard through Gartner before, and I've forgotten the term together, but it's essentially about partners rather than going into selling into a customer individually. They sort of partner together and sort of, is it sort of a joint go-to-market thing as well? Because it doesn't benefit anyone, the customers, with all these different voices, sort of all with their own agenda. So I guess that's another great reason to have sort of a partner ecosystem, or a tighter partner ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. I find, and in fact, one of the questions you and I discussed before was around kind of the some of the benefits that brings Siemens to the picture. And I think one of the benefits is that it's such a broad ecosystem, even within just Siemens of solutions, and that has a lot of benefit because, again, it accelerates time to value when these things are already knitted together, because digital manufacturing is all around bringing data from different places together so that more and more insights and more valuable insights and quicker insights can be provided to the organization.
Yeah, and actually, you're mentioning about bringing data together to, inform decision making is sort of a nice lead on to our first question. So we've already jumped around a little bit, which is great, which is what I like to do. But so the first question was really around IoT and data analytics and how it can be. Yeah, because you mentioned it there. It's more practically how it can be used to sort of drive, better decision making in manufacturing.
Yeah, and for us, IoT is a fundamental part of the first step, which is connecting data. You can't really do analytics or AI or anything like that without the data. So the first step is always connectivity and getting data together. And the very basic objective of that, at the very least, is achieving visibility of what's going on, because then even if you don't have any advanced analytics or things like that, at least you're making the data visible to the experts who can look at the data and start thinking, oh gosh, well, actually this looks particularly low, or this isn't quite to the target I'm aiming, and ultimately is driving change and driving improvement. That is the objective. So even if it is just with visibility, that's the very first step for us. And then it's what can you do on top of that? And once you get to that stage, then you can start using analytics where relevant, or AI where relevant. And obviously, the further down that scale you move, probably the most value you're able to unlock, particularly as you start bringing new data sources together. And I think one of the places where organizations are starting to mature to the level that they're bringing data not just from, for example, from a single process or from a whole factory, but for several factories, for the whole supply chain, linking it together from data, aftermarket engineering data. And when organizations gain the capability to do that, is hugely powerful for the business. But of course, is a journey.
I guess because like I said, it's a challenge across organizations. I mean, from a sort of a predictive maintenance deployment perspective, it's always interesting trying to scale, because each plant has their own sort of maybe own culture for a start, but own technology in place and all this kind of thing. So when you say that sort of visibility across all of those different parts of an organization, how challenging is that?
Oh, it's hugely challenging. I think particularly when you're talking about large manufacturing organizations, I think what you're saying is very accurate, in that usually factories have quite a lot of autonomy and in a way are quite independent from each other. So you might have an organization that have 50 factories. Those 50 factories might have 50 different applications, 50 different levels of maturity, 50 different potentially cultures. So it's hugely challenging, but there are ways in which you can kind of there are certain topics that need to be looked after locally anyway. So I think in some ways you need to support each factory independently. But to a certain level, when you're talking about data, I think there are ways of stepping away from applications and just focusing on kind of getting the data, surfacing the data from all of the factories, regardless of the application landscape, and bringing it together and kind of thinking more that, I suppose, from that data lake perspective, if you have the data available and if you can capture that data from different applications, that suddenly you can start getting insights and put additional applications on top of that to get insights across different sources of data. But I think it's probably one of the one of the biggest blockers when it comes to solutions in the factory environment. That diversity of solutions and approaches across different factories.
Yeah, I don't think I've asked this topic sort of come up before in previous podcasts. I've asked questions of other guests, but is there a reason why it's not joined up like that? I mean, maybe it's just a problem of having a large organisation. I guess you could talk about any large multinational organisation have similar problems. I guess, is it simply that, or is there other sort of factors at play?
It's hard to say, but one thing that I've observed in my experience is that large organizations, there's a huge amount of merging, demerging, and a huge amount of growing by acquisition of factories. And I think that intrinsically brings that diversity from a factory perspective, because it's not like organizations grow organically, especially larger organizations grow organically. So it's not a factory where you build all of the factories from the ground up, maybe with a single model, and maybe we're moving a bit more towards being able to do that. But at the moment, I suppose there's this brownfield environment and legacy environment where, you have an organization and 3 factories have come from this organization, 3 others from this other organization, and they all come with their own legacy and way of doing things.
Yeah, I guess what we're saying is you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you knew that everyone having exactly the same machinery, technologies, etc., and automation, etc., if you knew that at the time, then you would obviously implement that in every factory. But then not every factory has its different nuances. It could be manufacturing different products, for example, as well. So it's not quite as easy as just do everything the same, because every factory, even in a big multinational food and beverage, they'll be making pet food in one place and whatever chocolate bars in another place, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, with different requirements. So I think we've in some ways we've stepped away from kind of trying to make the manufacturing world perfect, because there's always so much complexity in it, and trying to deal with what are the kind of best practices and solutions that can actually get to the same outcome with let's say imperfect world, or just a real world with federated data sources, with a myriad of applications, with variety of data sources. How can you still achieve the same outcomes in that regard? And I think that's one of the if you look at the way your data platform principles have evolved, for example, and the way we're going with some of our new products, for example, Microsoft Fabric, it really that product, I think, represents a lot of our the things that we have learned along the way around, well, actually, we need to be able to operate with federated data sources. And it's not, well, how do we bring everything into a single data lake, but more how are we able to leverage federated data sources, so that you have a virtual single data lake, but you don't necessarily need to pull all of the data into the same place.
Yeah, and we talk about a lot within Siemens as well. It's more about small data rather than big data. Because I mean, that's often misconception that, and I've gone to lots of manufacturing events and things. You speak to, and they're like, we're collecting data and all this great data, but now we don't know what to do with it. And I guess that's where products like Senseye Predictive Maintenance come in, amongst others. But it's just interesting that people are people collecting data just because they think they should, rather than having a strategic mind behind it. I guess, is that part of the problem at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's that we have seen that sometimes where people kind of really focus on this idea of the data platform and have that starting point without necessarily linking into the real world and the real use cases, and we find that having a data first approach without connecting to those use cases can be quite risky, and not just risky because you might end up on a tangent, but also your ability to unlock value as you go along is less. So what we usually say is, yes, obviously we advocate for a data first approach, because that is the the fuel for everything, but do it in a way that is connected to specific use cases. So you were talking about predictive maintenance. If that is a place where you have a huge amount of assets, if you have a huge amount of downtime, if you have a lot of unexpected failures, for example, well, let's deal with that problem first and let that inform how you're building your data platform, but at the same time unlock value. And when you're unlocking value in shorter time scales, that's suddenly, I think that's kind of the oil of the engine that makes everything go quicker suddenly, because you gain people's buy-in, you get the evidence that you need to unlock new budgets, you get the evidence that you need to really have a data first approach, but informed by the real requirements of the business.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just thinking of a question. Mine's gone blank there. It's so much talk about data there, but in terms of the use, I have to edit this bit out because I've just gone. Well, when your mind just goes blank. I was just thinking of a response to that. It's so annoying.
No worries, that's what edition is for. It happens to be all the time, when you kind of get into an interesting point in your head and kind of can't quite connect it to the next point.
That's it. I've just remembered what it is. So
there you go.
We'll cut it back in. But yeah, so just leading on from what you said, it's interesting you mentioned actual use cases, which I think is often forgot. I've never sort of put that together myself. As someone who's learning about this subject, who's not, I've been in the industry a little while now, but I'm not an expert on the subject. But it's interesting that you should collect, I guess what you're saying is, not to put words in your mouth, but you should be collecting data based on a particular use case or a particular business problem, and then look at the data you need in order to help solve that problem through technology, I guess. Is that a good way to explain it?
Yeah, I would 100% say that, because then you're actually, as you're saying, you're solving a problem. You're going and working with the actual people who are involved, who are the stakeholders for this problem. You're understanding the applications that we're dealing with. You're understanding whether you have data or not, and what's the quality of the data. So once you have a specific use case, you're dealing with a lot of nuances that are not necessarily visible when you're just working on a data platform in an isolated way, and you're understanding the challenges of making that enterprise ready as well, because it's not just about doing a POC and testing the technology, but it's about the challenges of making enterprise ready, of achieving the integrations to the existing systems, of getting the right partners together, of making sure that you have the capability and the skills in-house or at your partner. So there's so much that needs to be solved when you do a minimum viable product around the real use case. And I think that's the one where the value comes from. Once you do that, you've done it, and you can continue to unlock value for the organization. And two, you've ironed out a lot of challenges and generated a lot of learning that will inform building a data first approach and a data platform and a data strategy as well.
And what's your view about proof of concepts in general? Because there's a lot of debate within Siemens, especially around Senseye Predictive Maintenance, where I don't know whether they need to. It's a case of needing to see the value from it before committing to big scaling, which isn't unreasonable in some cases. But the problem is how would you go about defining a really good proof of concept? So I'm guessing what I'm trying to say is they can be, if they're not approached correctly, then they don't show the value at the end of it, then it's a waste of time for everyone. So how do people set themselves up for success with these?
I think you took the words from my mouth, because the first thing I would say is it's probably best to start to think about proof of value rather than proof of concept, because when you do just a proof of the technology without thinking about value, ultimately partners have technology that usually works, most time works. They're not going out kind of advertising something that doesn't work. And the question is, can it deliver value? And I think proof of values still have their place. So it usually encourage organizations to go straight to a minimum viable product, because it means that what they have at the end of that is already something that they can use. And, the project finishes and the value doesn't go away. They can continue using that product. It's enterprise ready. But sometimes, depending on the level of maturity of the organization, or on the level of maturity of the partnership, for example, organizations that are working sometimes with a new partner needs a little bit more reassurance. And I think that's where the proof of value has a place, where you can work with some offline data and say, look, we're showing you with your real data that this is actually possible, and it would unlock this type of benefits. And hopefully that can, if successful, that can be used for an MVP. But I think it still has it's all about timescales, and I suppose commitment, financial commitment as well. So if I'm working with a new partner and they say, well, I can do an MVP for you in 15 weeks for this much investment, or I can do a POV for you in 2-3 weeks, kind of as part of just pre-sales, then depending on the level of risk, the organization might say, well, let's go for a POV first, see what it is, let's get to know each other, and then maybe we'll go for an MVP. So I think still POVs have their place, but as you say in your question, in the question, I think it still needs to unlock value, otherwise it's just kind of playing around with technology and not really, needs to be in context.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.